Welcome back to another episode of Straight Talking Leadership with me, Chris Pienkowski. My guest today is Will Stavros. Will has more than 25 years of courtroom trial experience and has represented thousands of people in court. He practices in both the state and federal courts and is dedicated to protecting the rights and interests of his clients through aggressive and personalized representation. However, his passion for personalized interaction inspired the pursuit of a career in Enneagram consulting. Will became a trial attorney because he thrives on intensity, complex human dynamics, and a rigorous approach to human motivations. This fascination led him to study the Enneagram and how it impacts his clients and trial strategy. Will shines as an energetic and interactive trainer and coach, teaching one of the most powerful and insightful tools for understanding human behavior. Will's clients work with him through a variety of tailored workshops to learn how people's core motivations translate into their personal and professional lives. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, one of the things that I like to do at the beginning of a show as a warm up is something that I call the Mad Minute. The Mad Minute is basically a couple questions. They have nothing to do with leadership, nothing to do with the topic at hand. They're really just designed to stimulate that gray matter between our ears and get our conversation flowing. So, are you ready for the Mad Minute?
I will do my absolute best.
Awesome, no doubt. So, question number one, you have the opportunity to do a 1 hour interview with anybody from history. Who is the one person that you would like to sit down for 1 hour with and have a conversation?
God, there's so many. One person from history, I guess. I'm just gonna go with Augustus Caesar.
Oh, I like that. You're the first one who's answered Augustus Caesar. Um, my go-to answer for that question is Ben Franklin. I love Ben Franklin. I think that what he's done is, still applicable today. But Caesar, Augustus Caesar, would definitely be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, I like Ben Franklin a lot too. There's a lot more information on him for me. See, Augustus Caesar's a bit of a mystery to me. Ben Franklin would be a fun conversation
Yes.
though.
Um, I get so many awesome answers about that. I would love to have an hour with a lot of these people. Second question. What's your favorite breakfast food?
I am vegan, so that's going to limit it. What do I usually eat for breakfast? Leftovers from the night before.
Got it. I'm a big fan of leftovers myself. Um, if it's good the first time, generally it's good the second time. So, Will, thanks for playing along. I just like to get that mad minute so that it, you know, gets our conversation going.
Hmm.
But today, we're here to talk about the Enneagram. And for those of you who don't know, that is, I'm going to use layman's terms, kind of a personality indicator, but I would really like you to share, give us the kind of the wave tops. What's the overview of what the Enneagram is? I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and how it categorizes different personality types.
Okay. The exact pronunciation, and I guess I'm a mild snob about this because I am Greek, is Enneagram. Enneagram is the Greek
Enneagram.
Enneagram. I even taught like that to my teachers because they weren't. But Ene is the Greek word for nine, and there are nine basic types in this system. And gramos is the Greek word for figure. It's a Pythagorean figure. Now, it's very interesting that this Pythagorean geometric figure, and they think it's older than Pythagoras, but Pythagoras used it heavily, um, maps personality. It maps ego structures, basically. And even beyond ego structures, the symbols proported, and although it's beyond my study to map many other things, but we're studying the Enneagram of personality. So maps personality. It maps ego structures, basically. And even beyond ego structures, and the system, the symbols uh, purported, and although it's beyond my study to map many other things, but we're studying the Enneagram of personality. So, um, it's a geometric form that tells us and what shows us the patterns of behavior that drive us and the motivations behind those patterns. And that can be extremely helpful because everybody thinks that most people think that other people think like them. And when you see that there's these very different ways of thinking, it really opens up a whole new reality to yourself and others. So that's kind of the wave tops of it, as you would
Okay.
say.
I don't know how many people are familiar with this. There are so many different, personality type indicators. You've got Myers-Briggs, you have DISC, and I think that those are more common in business settings. Although I was introduced to Enneagram by a client, and this was many years ago. But in your estimation, how many people know about it, use it on a regular basis, as opposed to some of these others that I think people default to?
It's becoming more and more popular all the time because of its utility. And I think when I first, the hardest thing about teaching and consulting with this is bringing it to people who already know these, have familiarity with these other systems, because they're like, well, I'm kind of like that, and they're familiar with it, and they're like, why would I move on to something new? And then I try to explain the differences. And I'm not an expert in those other systems, although I have a glancing familiarity with
Mhm.
a number of them. The Enneagram elucidates motivation. My understanding about those other systems is they discuss traits,
Yes.
whereas this the Enneagram discusses the motivation behind those traits. Because you might see three different people exhibiting similar behavior, and you would think, okay, they must be thinking the same way. But when you understand their Enneagram type, you can see they could be coming from three different places.
Okay.
When you Because you don't understand the motivation, because the it could motivate similar behavior, um, whatever is stimulating the response. But and if you address just the trait, you may be missing the mark when you're trying to persuade, understand, lead, in this context, someone else.
And so the way that you had described it to me was that it's more than a 3D picture of what, not only what that personality trait might be, but also the motivations behind it. So when I'm thinking beyond 3D, what are some examples? Like, I know that there are 9 um, types, or how do you categorize them? Like
Well,
people.
the best way when I teach and how I was taught to understand this is there's three centers of intelligence, and a lot of traditions discuss this. There are people that are head types, thinking center. There's a thinking center of intelligence. There's a body or gut center of intelligence. And then there's a heart or an emotional center of intelligence. And there are three types in each of the centers. The head types are all about security and guidance, and they're all trying to find it, but in three different ways. Okay.
Yeah.
And in each of the centers, one of the types goes outward generally to find it, one of the types goes inward to find it, and then the primary types on the triangle in the system go both inward and outward. So then we think I'm going to move on to the body center. Just I'm giving a brief overview. It's
Sure.
all about autonomy and respect, and they want to get their autonomy and respect. And one of the types withdraws to get it. One of the types goes and gets it. That's type 8. Like, will go out and get it, and then the 9 will go inward and outward to get that autonomy and respect. And then there are the heart types, or the feeling types, and they are all about their image, and they want attention and validation. Now, we're all a little bit of all the types, but
Okay.
one of them is our 95% of our time is spent there. at that type. And that's how we know ourselves. That's to the extent that we know ourselves. And that's how other people would know us and categorize us when they were talking about our personality. And then we're not just the type, but we usually lean to one side or the other, and have a wing. And that expresses, like, I'm a 6 with a 7 wing, whereas a 6 with a 5 wing looks very different. But when I teach this, people always say, well, I think I'm an 8 and a 3. And I'm like, no, the wing is actually directly adjacent. That's why it's called a wing.
Right.
And that's an aspect of the system too. And then beyond that, this is something when I teach my full day seminars, I get into in the second half of the day, there are 3 instincts. And that almost more important than the types, but the types are an easier concept to understand, the best place to start, and a very useful place. And one is social, one is sexual or one-to-one. Sometimes people in corporate settings, we just refer to it as one-to-one. And then one is self-preservation. And so everybody is a type with a wing. Generally, sometimes people have equal wings, but it's rare. Usually people lead one side or the other. And then we have a stack, whereas one of them's our top, one of them's our middle, and one of them's our bottom.
Okay.
And so we explore through the class, and we try to, throughout the day, everybody figures out their type. Now, some people can do it by taking a test online. They're reasonably accurate, but they're also dependent on how self-aware you are, in my opinion, to be able to get to it. Do you understand? You have to answer the questions in a certain way. I always joke that sometimes people's best friends and spouses know more about people than they do, because everybody has a habitualized self-image of how they see themselves and want to be seen. And they might answer the questions in that context rather than how they really are. They might not be at a level of self-awareness. So having somebody do a class or a private consult that's very experienced is extremely useful, because some people throughout the whole day go back and forth on a type or another. And then eventually they'll settle into it. As I say, they'll bring up an objection and I'll say, well, I understand that, but because of your wing and your stack, you'll look at it that way. And they'll be like, oh, now that makes sense. So I try to, I go through all the types. I go through them in different contexts, in a conflict resolution context, and social styles under stress. We talk about each type's basic fear and basic desire, because a basic fear drives each of the types. Basically, the thought is, this is a little deeper than some of the other useful social constructs that are very helpful to people in business, because the whole idea behind this is you basically lose contact with reality at a young age, where you're feel like, oh, I'm all part of it. You're in a flow state. And when you lose the flow state, then you're like, something's wrong. And then you gravitate, or you're born with one of these basic fears. And the basic fear leads to a basic desire, which basically the ego structure is built around trying to fulfill that basic desire. Does that make sense? That's a little abstract, but
it does make sense. And so that leads me to a question of, a lot of times your personality type doesn't necessarily change all that much throughout your life. But does your Enneagram number or type change from the time that you're young until you've become more mature? And do those fears change? Is there something early in life that creates a fear that therefore kind of sets a foundation for how your Enneagram is going to work?
There are some people that believe that you might come in and early childhood experience determines your type. I am not one of those people that believes that. I believe you are born your type and that you die your type.
Okay.
And that you throughout your life are different levels of awareness of your type, and depending on a number of factors, including like how good of a childhood you've had, um, stressors such as disease or mental illness, like, you know, and the mental illness is a chicken and the egg thing, but um, also like what do you do? What have you done for yourself? What kind of inner work have you done? What practices have you done? Have you been to therapy? Stuff would make you more self-aware in a lot of contexts. But, I've seen, I believe as a baby, from my mother's description of me when I was birthed, like what I did was very six-like. I've seen little kids in the subway at New York, like in a stroller, and I'll look at them and I'll be like, they exhibit certain traits of certain, and I'll think, God, like some are fairly clear. It's often much more difficult to tell in children than adults, but there are lines in the Enneagram, and that's like a kind of a deeper level thing, but that you use strategies based on the lines in the Enneagram. And when people are really, really low functioning, it's very difficult to tell their type because it kind of blends. And when they're extremely high functioning, like somebody that's done like a Zen master,
Okay.
it might be more difficult to tell their type because they kind of all blend with all the virtues of the type at a certain point. It's more easy in the average range where most people are, or like in the average, or like, because you could be a very self-aware, healthy version of your type. You can be a very average version of your type, or you can be a very unhealthy version of your type. And that's very determinative. That's what's particularly useful about this system. You're not just like a trait, you're a type with a wing and an instinctual stack and a level of health of that type.
So it's definitely not black and white.
No, there's a lot to it, but I mean, if you know it extremely well, it becomes closer to certain aspects of black and white. But it's still, everybody's still got a cultural context, a family context. Even though you're running one of these patterns, you're still an individual who it's going to express in different ways, in different cultural contexts, in different family contexts, different belief systems, different educational level. All kinds of stuff will affect how it's expressed. Just because, like, I've met other sixes who are social instinct rather than mine. My top instinct is 1-to-1 sexual instinct. Extremely different from me.
Okay.
Even with the same wing, even if they're a 6 with a 7 wing, and then you get a 6 with a 5 wing, it's even more different from me. Do you understand? So there's like hundreds of types if you count all of that and how you wanted to delineate different levels of self-awareness or health.
So, one of the things that I'm curious about is how these different types affect the way that people lead. So you'd mentioned that you're a 6. I took an online test when I first learned about Enneagram. I took another one recently, and they both came out pretty much the same, 8 with a 7 wing.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just maybe talk about a couple of these types and how that may profile the way that someone is approaching a leadership situation?
Absolutely, being a different type is going to determine how you approach a leadership situation.
Mm-hmm.
Say, for example, an 8. 8s want to be in charge. They've got like a general feeling like, I want things done my way, especially in the average levels. They're very comfortable being in charge.
Okay.
And they have a basic fear of being harmed or controlled by others. So they're getting out in front of it. Okay. And because that fear is usually unconscious, whatever the basic fear is, unless you've done a lot of work on yourself. And then the 8 will kind of come off as like brash and very confident, very decisive. Lots of CEOs are 8s, as a matter of fact. It's pretty common.
Okay.
And they can be, General Patton was an 8. Lyndon Johnson was an 8. Martin Luther King was an 8. I would say that Putin is an 8.
Okay.
Saddam Hussein is an 8. People always get upset if somebody unpleasant or unpopular is their type. And I'm like, every type's got unpopular because of the different levels of health and awareness. And
Yes.
yeah, so like I would say Teddy Roosevelt was an 8, and probably Theodore Roosevelt. And we base this on like historical ideas about these people and what we've read and seen in their actions.
Sure.
Sure.
And so you'd mentioned that, there's a triangle, right? And if there are 9 types, you've got the first 3 may share some characteristics.
The three in the triangle are the primary types of each center. The 9 is going to be least in touch with its body instinctual feelings and actions. Okay.
Oh, okay.
The 6 is going to be least in touch with the support and guidance system. And the 3 is going to be least in touch with its heart's desires. And then
Okay.
the other types are secondary type. That gets complicated, but yes,
Yeah.
but there are other aspects to it that, that are beyond the scope of this. Whereas like, yes, and there are different groupings of 3 that will come together in different ways. And that's for like the class that I teach, and we get into it, and it helps people understand the types in deeper and deeper ways by you explain commonalities in groupings of various different types. Like the types on the triangle in an object relation sense all have attachment issues, whereas
Okay.
an 8, a 5, and a 2 will have rejection issues.
Okay.
And then a 7, an 8, a 2, and a 5, and then the 7 and the 1 and the 4 would have frustration issues. Do you understand?
Okay.
Like, there's a number of different ways that different patterns like this come up in the system, which is why I suggest at least a full day to try to understand it. And then by doing so, we get into like, all right, you're this type. And then, like, I just did a class on team building week or 2 ago. We get into understanding the types, each basic fear, basic desire, the traits of the types, the high, the medium, the low, and then go through what some of the other patterns and the 3 typings in the context of like groupings. And then later on, we discuss like whatever we're looking to accomplish, either conflict resolution, leadership, team building, client relations, like how the types interact in those contexts. Does that make sense?
It does. And so that leads me to another question of when you as an individual know your type and you've been in a team environment, and maybe a team works with you for the day and they take your course, and now everyone knows everyone else's types. How is that beneficial from a team dynamic, a performance building standpoint?
Well, there's always these in any team. You want to know people's strengths and weaknesses so that you can assign them the proper tasks and duties, and you have reasonable expectations based upon their fears and desires.
Yes.
Also, people, when certain types will have certain conflicts based on their basic fear and basic desire that'll conflict with another one. If you understand that someone else is coming from this different angle and it's not like they're just trying to torture you,
Okay.
then you can make accommodations and have some empathy for it. And actually, I give out a little chart and like how to approach the other time. People tell me they love that because they said, all right, I'm going to go talk with so-and-so about this. I'm going to have a meeting. They'll read like, okay, they want to hear this information this way as to not like trigger them, not to
Okay.
annoy them. And they want to be respected and feel that they're validated for their worldview. It's something the Enneagram teaches us how to employ the platinum rule. rather than the golden rule. The golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule is treat others as they wish to be treated.
Oh, okay.
And that is extremely useful for if you want to employee retention, if you want to lead somebody and you want to inspire them. If you know that they are going to hear things in a certain context in a certain way and they need to understand things through that lens, and you can address that, then you're a much better leader than someone who's just like imposing their will on others and saying like, you have to do this way to meet my ego agenda.
Right.
You understand? And if they're unself-aware, they're not even going to be aware of their ego agenda. They're going to think that's the way the world is. But if at least they're aware, they can say like, look, I know I do this thing where I have these expectations and it tends to annoy other people at times, or I don't get good responses. So first of all, you're being self-aware, and then you're aware that these other people are coming from these other places. If you're a leader, you want to know the people you're leading, what they might be thinking and what they value, rather than forcing them to value things in a way that you value them, or that in a way that makes you feel safe and comfortable.
That makes perfect sense from a leadership standpoint, because when you're leading people, you do want to adjust your communication style, the way that you approach certain things. Some people like give me the bottom line up front. Other people
I'm
like,
one of those people, by the way, because of a 6. I'll worry about the worst case scenario and what could go wrong. And if someone's like meandering and not getting, I'm like, do like a newspaper headline, like give me
right.
and then explain the details afterward. Cause I'll be like, all right, where's this going?
Got it. You're almost waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes. That's very typical of a 6.
Okay.
Waiting for like what they always see what can go wrong. They're excellent troubleshooters. Their leadership style is to be inclusive. And because they have trouble contacting at the average levels their support and guidance system, they tend to second guess themselves and want to hear a lot of different opinions, and then will oftentimes value those opinions because they're looking for support and guidance outside themselves. Whereas the 8, which you are, is going to be like, well, I want things to happen a certain way that makes me feel comfortable and in control, and you need to do it that way. Does that make sense?
It does. And so we've talked about the 8 and the 6. How about like a 1, 2, or 3? What are they guided by from a leadership standpoint?
Well, one basic fears of being bad, corrupt, and that the bad, uncontrollable parts of them will control them. They want to be good and be aligned with the good and the right, but it's whatever the good is to them. Do you understand? You could be a fascist one, you could be a communist one, and either way, you're totally convinced you're right. I always say that 1s are kind of like the Supreme Court, in that I believe some of the justices like already know where they want to get to, and then come up with the reasons to get to that position. And 1s have a gut feeling of what is the right good thing to do, and then they'll come up with the reasons of how to do it. 1s tend to be very detail oriented, want to lead by example, want to be good, but then their flaws are they can be overly rigid and insist that other people share their standards when they're not doing as well. When they're really doing well, they're just always trying for the highest good for themselves and others all the time.
Okay.
They're in the body center, but their focus is inward, whereas the 8's focus is outward.
Got it.
Do you understand? Like the 8, as an 8, does that resonate with you? That
yes.
You're like sort of like, what are these other things, and how do I make? Whereas the 1's trying to control themselves a lot, and then 1's tend to be very tough on themselves. Like, am I doing the right thing? Is this? And sometimes when that gets too much, they try to equalize and can seem judgmental to other people.
Okay. All right.
Does that make sense?
I'm just kind of thinking of some people that I know that like, hey, that really
Jimmy Carter's a one, in
okay.
my opinion. Um, and as a president, he was accused of micromanaging a little bit because, like, it's a stressful. Whenever you're being under a stressful situation, you're unless you're doing a lot of practices or a lot of some sort of something to work on yourself, you're going to be more the average versions of your type, and then you'll get to see these things come out more. And when if you're constantly doing some sort of work on yourself, self-awareness work, then you can be a higher version of your type, and you'll see the high points of the type rather than the average or low points of the type. Does that
Okay.
make sense? So that's the freedom that you have within your type. People are like, I don't want to be a type. Well, you have a lot of freedom in like how self-aware you are within the context of your type. So that was an example of a one. And body types, like an 8, a 9, and a 1, all have issues with anger in some way or another. So as an
Okay.
8, I'm sure, and an 8, you feel it. It's like a fiery, like, whereas the head types, all about anxiety. And
Mm,
the heart types, it's all about like shame or hurt of like not being seen a certain way and validated and being thought of. 8 doesn't care as much what you think of them as long as you'll do what they want you to do. Does that make
okay.
sense?
Yes. For me, it's funny that you say that because when I was younger, when I was a teenager, a young man, I absolutely had issues with anger, and I didn't know how to place that. I used it to drive me forward. I would use that as motivation. I'd get angry and harness that energy in order to accomplish things. And then as I've gotten older, it's something that I've worked on, and I keep in check, and I'm conscious about it. Um, I used to, as a kid, be referred to as like a bull in a china shop, and now, I jokingly say that my spirit animal is a bull,
Mm.
and the whole top of my left arm is a raging bull. So I use that as a reminder sometimes if I feel that, like, no, sometimes the bull has to come out, like, no doubt about it, but it can't be your constant state. So that's something I learned, early in my professional career because it bit me in the ass a couple times.
So
Um,
as an 8, what some people, like a very high functioning 8 would be very magnanimous and be like a great inspiring leader. But when they get into the average levels, they're kind of like it's my way or the highway. And when they're talking to people, people feel they're yelling at them, whereas the 8 feels that they're just saying it how it is. Does that
okay.
make sense?
Yes. Yes. One of the things that you talked about was the self awareness. And what I'm most familiar with from a self awareness standpoint is emotional intelligence. Is there a correlation between emotional intelligence and how someone is utilizing whatever type they are as in their Enneagram?
Well, I would think so because you're understanding your own emotions, first of all.
Hmm.
So you understand because these types all drive emotions. Basically, humans are emotional creatures, and these types, um, there in each of the types, there's something called a passion and a fixation in this system. The
Okay.
passion is like based on that loss of contact with flow or being or whatever. This passion, there's a feeling in the heart center that arises, and this passion, and for 8 it's considered lust, but it's not a lust for in a sexual sense, it's a lust for power and like gusto and like I want things done. And and then that feeling in the heart center, then the head center is like, well, what do I do with this? So that's, and what happens at the average level is there's something called a fixation. So based on that, the fixation for an 8 would be vengeance or objectification, depending on how you look at it. You start seeing people as objects. and
Okay.
spawns in your little world.
Right.
Whereas for a 6, the passion that arises is angst. And then the fixation that arises is rumination. It just spin in your head, and like it's hard to break that cycle. And
Okay.
so, and each of the types has a passion and a fixation, and that's extremely useful in understanding the type. And when I'm teaching it, we go through each of the types passion, and we explain like how the basic fear leads to the passion and the fixation and basic desire of each of the types, and then go high. So yeah, and then you're understanding that someone else is coming from a different passion and a fixation, and you are aware of that, and you try not to step on their basic fear, because they have to be extremely high level not to be triggered by their basic fear.
Okay.
Almost everybody's going to be triggered to an extent if you bring up something that affects their and like triggers their basic fear.
And, so from a leadership standpoint, we, at least high performers, are always looking for that kind of deeper self-awareness. And that's what helps them improve their ability to lead. So how would someone be, more aware and kind of operate at a higher level with their Enneagram type? Like what are some of the things that someone could do? And I mean, we can say an 8, you pick a type, and I'm sure it's going to resonate with someone who's watching or listening to the show.
How can you rephrase the question? I'm not sure.
Yes. So how can someone, once they understand I'm a type 3, for example, how can I be high level in understanding my motivations and applying my type?
Well, first of all, you have to have the intellectual understanding and take a class. And by seeing all the other types, it helps you understand your type better, because and then when I do the classes, I break people into groups, and then they all like work with the material at different levels to understand where they're coming from. And then they see the different people like responding in different ways. But what you would do in order to be a higher version of yourself is constantly being self-aware and watching what you do. Like you'd be the observer self and watching your thoughts and what you do. That's the beginning of it, but practices of various sorts help. Like you would do meditation or breath work or heart opening exercises, depending upon what your issues are. And when you get all 3 of the centers working really well, I had a situation like that. I was at a week-long Enneagram class, and they worked on all 3 centers very well. And for like 2 weeks, nothing was a problem. I knew the perfect thing to say no matter what. Like anything anybody said, and things like typical things people would joke about me and tendencies, I'd be like, why would I ever think that? It would never have occurred to me. And it was like that for 2 weeks. Like, so if you constantly were doing that kind of stuff, you could elevate but it's a constant struggle. But then you go out into the real world, and I can still watch it. And my girlfriend tells me, like, by the way, you're doing this thing because her son's a 6, her sister's a 6. She's got a couple of good friends. So she's well acquainted with 6s. And she'll like say, you're doing this thing. And I'll be like, I am. You know what I mean? Like, and I'll be aware. And sometimes, depending on how much meditation or yoga, I do Qigong a lot too.
Okay.
I have a better time at controlling it than others.
Okay.
Do you understand? But you have to work on yourself. But understanding the types is a huge change in worldview. My life before knowing the Enneagram and after understanding is completely different. And most people will say that, because you can understand that everyone's really coming from one of these places.
Yes.
And you understand that you're coming from one of these places. And without knowing that, you're just walking through the world, and thinking that the world's just given to you as it is, and you're seeing it through your normal cultural lens, and unknowingly through your Enneagram type and instinct stack and wing, and you don't even realize it, and you're just saying, well, this is how things are, and then you're running into these conflicts, and other people are understanding you, and you're like, why don't they see this? This is perfectly clear to me.
Right, because you're kind of looking at it almost with blinders on because it's effectively second nature to you.
Yeah, it's almost like having a secret decoder ring is one way of looking at it for understanding others. And it's almost like you were colorblind and someone said, now you can see all the colors.
Okay.
That's like, it's a huge change in worldview. Like once it's well worth the investment of time and money, in my opinion, to learn this. Like people who learn it are really, like everybody I've taught it to, not there's, you got to be ready for it too, to be honest with you. Some people aren't ready for self-awareness, and maybe this
That's
isn't
true.
the tool for them.
Right.
But people who are ready for a little, they really want to improve and they're really motivated, this is an amazing tool.
That's great. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with this, and I think we could continue this conversation. But I know we've been talking for a little while now, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. I've got one final question for you before we start to wrap up the show. But I know that by trade you're an attorney. Your passion is the Enneagram. But if you were to say what your own leadership philosophy is, going through life, what is your leadership philosophy?
My leadership philosophy is to understand what I'm projecting onto the situation and how to accommodate for my own projections that may or may not be real, and to understand what other people are going to be projecting onto the situation and make accommodations for that. And with understanding those key elements and drivers of human behavior and human thought and human motivation, you're able to effectively lead through the platinum rule. And this is the Enneagram gives you a map to lead through the platinum rule.
Uh, I've never heard the platinum rule until today, but I like that a lot. And it's something that I'm going to be a little more conscious about. Uh, Will, any final thoughts, parting words before we wrap up the show today?
Any parting words final? People think that their ordinary lives are too busy to like take on something new like this, but if you do, it will change your life for the positive in ways that you can't even predict now, and you will like be very grateful for understanding yourself. Like what's more important than understanding yourself and
Yeah.
understanding the others that you interact with? Like, and if you think that you want to just keep doing it the same way and maybe and making the same mistakes over and over and over again that your pattern drives you towards, you can do that. But this is an option. And I don't understand why everybody in the world isn't like wanting to do this to the every extent that they can do it. You understand what different types of people you're voting for are,
Mhm.
all your friends, your spouse, everybody in your life, and to the people who you work with and lead, and yourself. I don't understand what could be more important than that. That's why I'm so fascinated by this. And that's why I have a passion for it. And that's why every day that I get up and I get to do this work, I'm extremely grateful and extremely excited.
Awesome. And you're right. From a leadership standpoint, even from a personal growth standpoint, understanding your own motivations and understanding the motivations of the people around you and how to utilize all that information in order to achieve a common goal, that's really what leadership boils down to. So I can really see where the benefit of knowing what your Enneagram type is would really help to take you to the next level from a leadership and even a personal standpoint. I mean, I always talk about leadership is not just something that happens in business or in some type of organization. It happens in life every day all around us. So this is just another kind of tool in your toolbox in order for you to be the best person that you can be.
Yeah, so I always tell people when they are hiring me to come in and teach their staff that they can take the people are like, oh, my husband's this, my kid's this makes so much sense now. It's not just valuable in the workplace, it's valuable everywhere.
Yes.
Anybody who deals has to be a person in the world and deal with themselves and deal with others. This is valuable.
Awesome. Will Stavros, how can people find you?
Well, this is what I'm going to you pick up my card and do it this way because I'm never really that good at this kind of thing. But um, my consulting firm is Aletheia Consulting. A is the prefix of negation, and Lethe is one of the rivers in the Greek and Roman mythological underworld. It's the river of oblivion. So Aletheia means the removal of oblivion.
Oh.
And it means truth, as it's the Greek word for truth, as the removal of oblivion. But if you go to my website, it's aletheia.com, ALETHEIA, truth.com, aletheia-truth.com. And I guess you're going to be posting a few things. And you can call me. I love to talk on the phone, way better than email. I am a talker. But you can call me at 410-995-7740, which is my business line, 410-995-7740. Leave a message, or you can email me by going to my website. If you just typed in William Stavros Enneagram, it'll come up because everybody misses the E or the I in that Aletheia, but I wanted to do the Greek. I just love that concept of truth as unconcealment because I feel is what I do is I remove the oblivion of everyday ordinary life and say, like, look, this is what's going on. I'm unconcealing the patterns behind what's really going on.
That's awesome. And yes, I will be linking that in the show notes. So if someone was listening to this in the car and didn't get a chance to write it down, there will be a link in the show notes so someone can absolutely get in touch with you and make it easy for folks to find you. Will, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. And for everyone who's out there listening, I know that you got some nuggets of information. I know that Will shared some things that are going to help you to be the best person, the best leader that you can be. So if that's the case, please like this episode. Please share it with others. This is absolutely valuable information. Subscribe to the channel so that you are always getting the leadership content that's always coming out. And from Will and me, final words, lead on.